What you see here is Richard Paul Lohse in front of a typical Lohse work. It is typical because it has equal quantities of color. The idea behind that was that Lohse thought this is like a glimpse into the future of egalitarian societies. As a Marxist, Lohse was convinced that art and culture are only reflections of the way a society is producing its goods. And so he was convinced that this art that you see here was the height of the expression of our societies. He was explaining this because he said we live in a Fordistic society where you have mass production, where you have the same item being made over and over again. You have here as well the same geometric item that is in this row. And we are doing here the same thing. We have a Fordistic assembly line. We have this book here that has to be signed in order to give it added value. So if you buy the book and you got bored of it, you can be sure that you can sell it maybe even for a higher price. Welcome everybody to Zurich's Concretists and the actuality of the selling of our book. Over there is Professor Dr. Jörg Scheller. Are you? You are. Jörg Scheller. He's a bodybuilder. That's why he has to start the assembly line, because first we have to do some unpacking. There's all this plastic. Besides that, he is a teacher at several universities. He has a death metal band. And he is extremely productive in lots of newspapers, lots of magazines, writing cleverly and with lots of wit about almost everything. This is Dora Imhof, art historian working scientifically at the university. She is specialized in film and art and in oral history and has done lots of very long interviews to secure what has happened in art history. At the same time, she's publishing lots of books. One of the latest ones was C is for Curator, and this is a book about Bice Curiger, who is over here. Now, I don't know whether I have to introduce Bice. If you're in the art world, whenever you have one of these lists, who is important / powerful in the art world, you can be sure that Bice is in it. I guess the two biggest claims to fame is that she was the founder of the art magazine Parquet Art, and she was the curator of the biennial in Venice. And at the moment, she is the artistic director of the Fondation Van Gogh in Arles. My name is Thomas Haemmerli. I'm the editor of this book. I'm the loud one, and I wrote about Lohse and Max Bill. And the blonde lady sitting there is Brigitte Ulmer. She's my co-editor. She's the quiet one, and she wrote about Camille Gräser and Verena Löwensberg. And here you have already more or less a psychological overview of the core group of the Zurich Concretists. Now, I will try quickly to give you some idea what the Concretists were and what we are talking about. Max Bill defined in 1936 in an exhibition at the Kunsthaus, concrete design or concrete art is art that develops out of its own means, aus seinen eigenen Mitteln and laws, without having to derive or borrow these from external appearances. Hence, the visual design is based on color, form, space, light, and movement. And the second thing that later came to this definition, that there is no reference in the outer reality, was the idea that they were applying mathematics to their art. Here you have an example of Camille Gräser, where you can see the quantity of the color is the same in both sides. It's rather easy to understand how this works. Here we have Max Bill. If you start up there, you can see as well these squares getting bigger and bigger. Now, the concretists in the 30s were something of a bigger movement. This is a Willy Baumeister poster. At this, oh, you should start to work.
Should I start?
Please. Yeah, you should start to work. There's no such thing as a free talk. Willy Baumeister, and you can see it was a goodbye to the old style, goodbye to ornaments, and in the 20s, especially in Germany, you had everything was new. You had new typography, you had new architecture, you had new furniture, you had new production design. Everything had to be new. This was especially the case at the Bauhaus, where after the start, they said that what they were trying to do was designing items that could be produced industrially, and they weren't so much interested in individual art. And the idea, of course, was a progressive one, a political one. The idea was to enhance society, to get a better society through better art, through better design, through better graphic design.
How is this?
Ich kann sonst dann nachher die übrigen tun. One of the guys who was there in Bauhaus was Max Bill. He went there because he wanted to be an architect after having heard a speech by Le Corbusier. He never had a formal education, but for example, he built a whole huge bridge somewhere up in the mountain. This same idea of getting a better society through design was part of this style in Holland, the group around Mondrian and Theo van Doesburg, who was the first one who coined the term concrete art. And the same thing, of course, you have in the early Soviet Union, where the constructivists as well had this idea, say goodbye to individual art and try to enhance society. So this is something that was quite important for the Zurich concretists. And because of all that, they were working in lots of fields. One of them was advertisement. Here you have an advertisement of Lose, which for the time was very revolutionary. And the interesting thing is that the concretists weren't ashamed that they were doing stuff that was not art. They were quite proud of it. And Lose always said he loved to work for Escherwies because they were producing machinery. And if you wanted to have this egalitarian society of the future, you needed machinery. So they had a high consciousness of what it means to organize a society. Let me see what is the next picture. Oh, this is this is important. So the first time they could exhibit was in 1936 in the Kunsthaus Zurich. And they were not only making advertisements for other people, but also for themselves, especially Max Bill. Here we have the catalog of this exhibition, and you have in the artists list, you have Max Bill. You have texts, you have Max Bill. And then very small over there, you can see this is Bild Zürich, so the back of the catalog had an advertisement that was done by Bill, and there was also an inside joke because the eye you see here was one of the lovers of Max Bill. So it was always the case that Bill really tried to make advertisements for him and the whole group. Someone told me who had worked with him together that he said quite often, the most important thing is propaganda. You have to do propaganda. The problem for them was in the 30s and the 40s that they were too modern for Switzerland. Here you see someone in this show, gives you a bit an idea what public they had to deal with. And Here you have a picture of 39. This was the Landesausstellung, was a huge exposition which on one side was intended to be resistance against National Socialism and communists, on the other side of thinking about the core values of Switzerland. And it's quite typical what you see there. The sculpture is the art that was en vogue at this time. And for the concretists as well as the surrealists and everybody who was a little bit modern, it was really difficult in Switzerland. This was aggravated by the fact that Stalinism in the Soviet Union put an end to modern art, and you had the same thing in Germany in 1937 with the exhibition Entartete Kunst. And in Switzerland, you had echoes of that. You had lots of people who thought that the Nazis were right. Mind that in 1937, they hadn't started the war. And for example, one example that locals might understand that flabbergasted me was that Karl Geiser, a very left-wing sculptor, went to see Entartete Kunst and thought this was quite good, because he also thought that modern art was just rubbish. And on the other side, in the bourgeoisie, you had lots of people who had certain sympathies for the Nazis, and so they hated the concrete art. Now let me see what comes next. Oh, here we have the whole lot. You see Max Bill making a better spoon. Next to him, Lohse, Verena Löwensberg, and Camille Gräser. We go fast forward after the war. After the war, you have the situation that in lots of European countries, because of communism, because of Nazism, modern art was quite over, and Switzerland all of a sudden was like on the height of modernity and was re-exporting what had come to them from Russia, from Germany, and from France. And in 1949 there was an exhibition in Stuttgart, and this exhibition coined the term Zürcher Konkrete, Zurich Concretists, and it was pure coincidence, but in the end there was this one core group, Max Bill, Richard Paul Lohse as the leaders, and the more quiet ones, Verena Löwensberg and Camille Gräser. Let me see what comes next. Oh, this is, if we are looking, what was the influence, what was the effect of the concretists, maybe the most important thing was Swiss graphic design. And here you have a view of Central Station in '64. Richard Hollis, when he came to Zurich, a British graphic designer, he was amazed when he saw this advertisement by Müller-Brockmann, because it seemed so modern to him. And the biggest influence that you have of the concretists, if you see them in a bit bigger way, is Swiss graphic design. Then we have, you had all of a sudden, you had in the 50s the problem that there came new art forms. There was all of a sudden Tachism, there was abstract expressionism, there was informel, later came op art, and all of a sudden the concretists were again viewed as something that was over. But there was one thing in Switzerland, specific for Switzerland, and that was Herr Waser. Jack Waser was an entrepreneur who was selling office interior stuff, who was selling stationery. He was quite fond of the concretists, and he started to print, to make lots of prints. And firstly, the concretists, they were very happy with this idea, because they thought it was a way to get to people who can't afford art. And so these rather cheap prints were a way to come to more people. Jack Waser started something in the 70s that was called Art in the Office. And there was a time when in every bank, in every waiting room of a dentist, you had these concrete pieces this is still today. It's one of the last ones I found, and I like it a lot because if you look here in the foreground, you can see that the people working there have a different idea of aesthetics. Okay, I have to see what comes next here. Oh, and with this I come to Dora Imhof. That they were everywhere had as an effect that many people in Zurich hated them, and for a long time you were either pro or you were contra. Nobody in the art world was neutral to them. It wasn't just another art scene. They were rather powerful, and they always thought they hadn't their due share, and so people were for or against it. And here we have a great story from the 70s, and maybe you could tell us the story, Dora, please.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to this panel and to especially to contribute a text to this beautiful and inspiring book that really sheds new light on concrete art. In my essay, I write about the so-called Zurich art scandal, a quarrel between two artists that took place in 1970. The dispute made headlines in many newspapers, as you can see behind, and indeed it is more than just a quarrel between two artists, but it also involves politics, power, and the role of art in contemporary society. So very contemporary topics. One protagonist in the quarrel is Max Bill. You just heard about him. On the other side is the painter Warlin, who was born as Willy Guggenheim in Zurich. Warlin, in contrast to the concrete artist, painted figuratively and expressively throughout his life. Everyday scenes and portraits were important topics for him, and he often engaged in art, in the art historical tradition of Munch and Goya and others. While he worked outside the then current avant-garde, he was highly esteemed by writers like Friedrich Dürrenmatt. So, what happened in 1970? In the traditional annual Christmas exhibition at the Helmhaus, an exhibition space on the Limmat, 3 portraits of Warlin were on show. On November 29, shortly after the opening of the exhibition, he slashed 2 of these portraits with a razor blade. He injured his hand in the process and returned home bleeding. What makes an artist destroy his own works? Well, the problems were not the portraits, but the exhibition and its curator, Max Bill. It was already the 3rd Christmas exhibition in which Max Bill was in charge. The 2 previous shows had exhibited abstract, concrete, and fantastic art. The annual show of 1970 was devoted entirely to figurative painting. The fact that the concrete artist Bill dedicated an exhibition exclusively to figurative art could seem like a very generous gesture. But Bill also wrote a foreword in the exhibition brochure. There, he described figurative art as backward-looking, complacent, and provincial. Realism was out of step with the times, Bill declared. It was not really engaging with science, technology, and other important aspects of modern life and society. After the attack on his paintings, Warlin wrote in a newspaper article. You can see it also behind. Bill's cake has been distributed. It leaves a bitter taste. The city-appointed manager of an inn, the Helmhaus, has the following printed on the menu. Don't come to this place. The cooking here is miserable. Such a restaurant manager is fired immediately everywhere, but not in Zurich. In fact, Wahler had not really wanted to take part in this exhibition at all. So Bill had borrowed all the works by the painter from collectors behind Wahler's back, so to speak. It has to be said, this episode does not reflect very well on Bill's curatorial work or attitude. But the main problem for Wahler and others was the power he exercised in so many different areas. He was an artist, curator, member of the Federal Art Commission and jurist, theorist, university lecturer, and from 1967 to 1971, also member of the Swiss National Council, the government. It is therefore less surprising that Wahler damaged his own works, which seems like a helpless or gesture in a way, but rather that Bill, then so powerful and established, still felt the need that he had to denounce figurative painting. For me, this is still a bit puzzling. Maybe you, Bice, who knew him, or who you were, you have more to say about that.
We come to Bice in a second. Just one thing that Margaret Weinberg-Staber told me was that as they had such rough times in the 30s and the 40s, this mindset went along with them until the end. They somehow were always in this fighting mood. How do you see it, Bice? You agree? Would you agree?
Yes, I absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Richard Baulose and and Bice Curiger. Let's start with. I mean, how were they? Can you?
They were, dogmatic. That's for sure. And there is a word, Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. I mean, I was 20 years old in 1968. It says already a lot. And these elder men, I mean, Lose was kind of a nice guy who was very present, but looking for trouble all the time with his finger up in the air and telling us what we should do or not do. And the same, I mean, it was a men's club, and we were early feminists, excuse me. We were 68 people who wanted to change the world. My friends had long hair, and we were wearing miniskirts. And yet, I mean, I was admiring the artistic world and also against the dogmaticism of the left wing at the time at university. So it was a very important schooling to find out. There was, of course, a left-wing student organization I was part of, and Lose was left-wing, but then there were other painters like Hugo Schumacher, who was more against consumerism of a capitalist.
And very explicit, very explicit.
Very explicit. So there were big debates: who is more important? And for me, it was also pop culture and music, you know, and the democratization of art came through pop culture. So it was a very prolific, incredibly inspiring moment, which I really am glad. It was my schooling, and it was not just the academic world, it was really what was the friction with live people. And yes, the Kunsthaus Zurich, where I later worked for 20 years with Tobia Bezzola, who is also there. And it was, there was a slight a reserved attitude in the house because I think there was the fear that this movement wanted to take over the whole house. Also there was a tradition of supporting more the expressionist or expressive aspects of art, because the first director, Wartmann, was very close to Munch. The founders of the Kunsthaus, which is not called Kunstmuseum, it was meant to be very close to the artistic scene, the life scene, because it was founded already in the 18th century by artists. And the building, 1911, there was Hodler. You can also see him more on the expressionist side. So this was an important aspect, that they didn't want to be taken over by the very rationalistic, more crafts, Bauhaus-oriented movement, which was anyway very close to a Swiss very utilitarian mentality, which embraces what can be sold and used, and not very much into the more expressive mood. But interesting, just to add something, there was a big movement around the architectural scene, who collected Friedrich Kuhn or Varlin, so to be also against this kind of dogmatism of Max Bills, who was, of course, also an architect. And there was Friedrich Kuhn, who at the Kunsthaus also one night, I think that was in the 60s, he came along with a huge painting of his and chained it in front of the, or to the closed main door of the Kunsthaus to also protest that they didn't buy his art. So it was not only a fight against the concrete, but also against some Kuhn, you can say, was an anarchist, expressive, pre-pop artist. His early work, you can really look at it as you look at early David Hockney paintings. So I end my speech.
Wait! You asked me to show these photos. This is a discussion, I think 71, with Beuys, Arnold Gehlen, Max Bill, and Bense.
Max Bense was a theorist of more the technocratic philosophy of the time, pre-computer world, and it was an incredibly lively talk. You can still look at it on YouTube. It's incredible. You see these 5 very excited men screaming, sweating under the lamps, and not aware at the time that you don't scream in front of a TV camera. And the funny thing was, I mean, it was really all the excitement of the time, but Joseph Beuys and Bill were somehow the only one who really defended art, because they both thought art is very important for a society, otherwise it it cannot exist without barbarity. So yes, what fascinates me today is that what you think are complete opposites and extremes, somehow looking back, you see how this was mixed, and Max Bill was director at the Kunstgewerbeschule. He organized in the 60s very early Marcel Duchamp exhibition. So that is really interesting. If you look back at history, that it's not so black and white.
He was very open. This is one thing one has to say. I have one last question. I would like to know how you saw that at the time. In 1968, Max Bill got by a friend who was in the same political party and the mayor of Zurich. He got the art prize. And the speech he made was called Das Behagen im Kleinstaat, contentment in the small state, and it was not ironically that he chose this title. And I mean, of course, it was a provocation. Weinberg-Staber also said he knew that it was a provocation against people like you. Do you remember this?
Yes, I mean, I was, of course, oriented also to the international art, which was related to what the work that Harald Seemann did and Jean-Christophe Amann at the same time. And yes, it's not that figurative art is you can say this is just backwards oriented. There was a huge movement coming out from Switzerland, from the Kunsthalles in Switzerland. And when Paul Nizon wrote his book, Diskurs in der Enge, he completely missed that there was already a big movement, an exhibition called When Attitudes Become Form, taking place in 1969 in Bern, where the whole avant-garde of the time, American avant-garde, European avant-garde, was presented and really debated. I mean, it was not just a little poof. Yeah.
Yeah, there was even a film made by Radanovic because he was so provocated by this Bill speech. In the 1990s, Martin Heller, the director of the Museum of Applied Arts, wrote a very sharp polemic against the Concretists, which we reprinted here in the book because it's quite important to understand their way. And there inside he says they are the perfect expression of Swiss state art, always clean, avant-gardistic, empty, vain, and thus usable everywhere. Now, Jörg, you wrote in your essay, you praised the autonomy of the concretist art, and you praised them also from a political side. Could you explain?
Yeah, sure. After I finished my work or before?
I hope you can do both.
It's funny, by the way, that the unwrapping of this book about concrete art has produced a sort of like cheap pop sculpture here on this side. So now I have praised in a way because I'm interested in the spread between, say, like the self-referentiality of the artworks and the actual lifestyle of the artist and what they actually did. So you could argue that the works themselves are sort of like empty and are tailored to, you know, like the dentist's office and I don't know what, or to big banking corporations. But the artists themselves, they were quite engaged. I mean, they were like socially engaged, they were politically engaged. And I find this spread quite inspiring, particularly today when in so-called artivism, so like this nexus of art and activism, it is kind of expected that the work itself needs to be political and needs to be engaged and needs to be instrumental in a certain way. And that, I think, quite often leads to kitsch. And it quite often leads to an illiberal or even like authoritarian understanding of art. Because authoritarian systems in general, they cannot do with the autonomy of art. They need to control things. And they also cannot stand emptiness. So you have to have an art that represents your ideology, and you have to have art that works in the sense of your ideology. So there has never been, I think, an authoritarian system with like concrete art propaganda, you know, like thousands marching through the streets, like holding up black squares or whatsoever. That so far has not worked. And so this is why I think the self-referentiality and the autonomy of the art is really a big issue for the authoritarian mind, for the illiberal mind. And the Zurich Concretists, as boring as some may find them, actually show that it is possible to produce that kind of like bourgeois art, this decadent art. And on the other hand side, actually, I mean, like take care of refugees, engage politically, become a member of parliament, whatsoever. And this simultaneity, I find that quite interesting and quite inspiring. Today, probably I would have hated them in the 1960s as well.
Could you say a bit something more about? You said they were quite engaged politically. Okay, one was the thing. Bill was in Parliament. What else?
Yeah, you could actually think of bills, a bill like housing, like refugees, no, people who were just like politically persecuted. And then also I think Löwensberg is quite interesting in this regard, particularly because she was not openly political. And I think a couple of years ago, I think it was in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, there was an article who described her as an anarchist. And I think that makes a lot of sense because the anarchists are very skeptical with regard to like the big theories, you know, like there's metaphysical ideologies and so on and so on. And they rather favor like a down-to-earth attitude and mentality. So I think Löwensberg, in her way of doing things and in her lifestyle, has actually incorporated the different understanding of politics. You know, not the big gesture, not the hymn, not the flag, not the theory, not the ideology, but the down-to-earth, on a daily basis, like embodied, you know, like political way of life. And that, I think, is also something one can like rediscover these days.
Would you two agree what Jörg is saying, that this kind of political art that these days is everywhere is a kind of an authoritarian way, or is kitsch?
I would not call it authoritarian. I would just argue that like the authoritarian
coming out of
mind,
an authoritarian mind.
Not even. No,
okay,
no.
okay. Rephrase, please.
I think it can be instrumentalized in such a way, and I think that the authoritarian mind simply cannot do with autonomous art. So I would not claim that everybody who does like activist art is authoritarian. No way. I mean, the autonomy of the art consists in also deciding to become like activist, if you like. So I would not go so far. I find it interesting that you can be activist and autonomous, self-referential in your art at the same time.
How do you see this?
I totally agree. Boringly, I mean, socially engaged art today is not abstract. It can take many forms. So, but not
Exactly.
as you described.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I think something has changed because in my youth we still thought you can change the world. Today, the world changes and it comes down to us, and we just have to swallow it. It's not that, I think, being young, you go out and think, I'm going to change the world. You can protest against that that states don't act enough against the climate problem, but it's not changing your lifestyle that is going to change the world. You cannot have this feeling anymore. Wearing a shorter skirt, changing society. That was, I mean, our still in the 60s. It was our feeling. We had longer hair, and it meant we changed the world.
So you do believe that this whole activist art is not really has the idea that it's changing the world?
I think it's a problem that we feel so powerless, isn't it? I mean,
but that's why we're not. That's maybe why we're not activists anymore.
But may I just Thomas, may I? Just
go ahead, please.
I think one could even say the opposite is true. That, I mean, art was so successful, what people have been doing in the 1960s, 70s, that now it's, I mean, it's just like part of our daily lives. So we no longer actually feel it, but it's there. And I mean, all the big banking corporations, they now implement identity politics, you know, like from obscure essays written in the 1970s that nobody would have expected to become so prominent. So I think many ideas of the time are now simply working. They are there. And I think the ideas of our time will probably be pretty much the same.
Let's go back to the Concretists. There was in Geneva a great exhibition by Verena Löwensberg. Verena Löwensberg just had an exhibition in New York in the Gallery of Haus und Wirth. You can read about this in Art Forum. And at the same time, Max Bill also is in the program. Ja, was fährt mir nicht mehr? 50, Entschuldigung. Is also now sold at Haus und Wirth. And how do you see this? I mean, this huge gallery, this power of them, are they changing the perspective that worldwide and the art world is on the Zurich Concretists? Does it change anything?
Yes, I mean, the market is the market, but I would say the problem is today that the medias are less and less offering debates on art, and they leave, I mean, what is supposed to be valuable in art, it's more decided by rankings of prices which have been set in auctions, and not by debating intellectually. If you still do it, you do it in niches, and then the right wing says art is only an elitist play. And looking back at the 60s and 70s, there were really heavy debates, and where are they today? I mean, it's an indifference and just an excitement about prices in, you know, in the newspapers. You have always the sensational news that, again, there was a record or not. That is the level in which now art is treated.
If there is any question in the public, because we don't have too much time anymore, your perspective on, for example, Löwensberg and this like rediscovery of her?
Yeah, well, I have to say I also rediscovered Löwensberg when reading the text in the book. And I mean, historical positions that seemed obsolete or uninteresting or out of time for a while get rediscovered by artists, by art historians, and by the art market. And it's also interesting how these discoveries influenced one another, or are also instrumentalized, but also give fresh perspectives because they focus on specific aspects often that were not seen before.
Jörg?
A specific question or?
No, your perspective on how they are viewed at the moment. Is there any change of the perspective on Zurich Concretists?
It's hard to say because I have the feeling it's just starting now. And this book is certainly like a catalyst for this process. I don't have the impression that they are now part of a new discourse of heated debates of intellectual engagement in a broader sense. So here I would agree with what Bice just said. There is no real intellectual debate surrounding the Zurich Concretists at the moment. But it would be great if we could somehow instigate such a debate and somehow show that it makes sense to view them now in a dialectical light, to shed a new light on them. And this could be precisely a way of demoralizing the debate about art, because I think we discuss and debate a lot about art, but it's always in connection with ethics, moral politics. So you don't treat the works themselves seriously.
For me, one thing where I do believe we could learn of them is the practical approach to politics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And my prime example is always here in Zurich, we have a huge problem that there's not enough housing. Mm-hmm. And the left that is ruling the city since 30 years is always saying, yeah, it's because of capitalism and prices are too high. And they never think that a city that is growing needs more houses, needs more flats, needs more production. And if you go back to the 30s and the spirit they came from, you can see this still in Vienna, where you have this Marxistic approach to the problem with housing that says, we need to have more production. And in Vienna, private enterprises are producing houses and flats. Communities are producing houses and flats. And the city of Vienna is producing houses and flats. And this is one answer where you can say, this is one of the things we could learn from them. And the second thing that I see is that on one side, you can say it's a bit ridiculous if you compare the utopias of the style and Russian constructivism with Max Bill, who was in parliament. But on the other side, with all the problems we have today, being in parliament, I think, is quite a clever and, in the end, decent way to try to do something. Now, do we have a question from the public? I think our time is almost up. Oh, yes, very important, thank you. So, Tobias Betzler just told us in the Tessin there will be a huge exhibition of Richard Paul Lohse, and it will also be possible to see it here. This exhibition will come to Haus Konstruktiv here, I think, in 26. First Lugano, Tessin, Lugano. Okay, first Lugano, if you want to be with the first, or here in the house. Thanks a lot for your patience, for your attention. And now here you have the added value books you can buy and sell in some years. Thank you.